Happy Halloween, everybody. Our final episode of October and a historic weekend for women's college volleyball. What a year it's been, filled with so much milestone and history. Alongside Mick Haley, I'm Daniel Gilman. We're both on location here. Funny enough, I'm in Mick's stomping grounds. Mick's up in the Pacific Northwest. We had a great weekend. We got to catch up and watch Texas play Baylor on Friday night. My first time at Gregory. Mick got to catch up in Seattle and watch Oregon take on Washington. And so here we sit, Mick. There's a lot to cover in this episode. As always, we're brought to you by SNA Sports, better equipment for a better game. We've got a new committee top 10 poll. As always, we have our AVCA Taraflex rankings and the Volleyball Magazine top 16. It's the final month of the regular season, Mick. Are we starting to see a little bit of wearing down? BYU gets demolished by Kansas State. Washington State loses both matches. It was a wild weekend in the West Coast. Stanford swept by Arizona State.
Yeah, it's October. And when October comes, boy, when you get close to the end of October, now you've got Halloween parties. You've got all of these things besides the second round of tests. I'm telling you, this is really hard on these kids. They don't realize it, but maintaining a certain level is very difficult. And the coaches that are able to do this should get a pat on the back.
So we had the first ever women's college volleyball match on Fox. In fact, two of them on Sunday, as Michigan came from behind against Ohio State, won their version of the game. And then after Vikings, Packers, pretty cool how they did it with Wisconsin and Minnesota. Unfortunately, Keegan Cook's crew is just not up to the snuff this season. Another top 50 loss for Minnesota as Wisconsin swept through there. Meanwhile, Nebraska, the only unbeaten team left in the nation, as the Citadel finally fell in 5 sets to Western Kentucky, and the Huskers didn't drop a set against Maryland and Rutgers. Let's take a look at the AVCA Taraflex top 5 rankings. And well, Mick, as we sit here with all of the jumbling, 1 and 2 stay the same. Stanford drops from 3 to 5 after being swept by Arizona State. Louisville, ahead of their matchup with Georgia Tech, moves up to 3. They swept Miami and Florida State. And Texas, well, they swept Baylor after reverse sweeping Baylor over the weekend, and they move up to 4. Where do you sit with the Louisville, Texas, Stanford 3, 4, 5?
Well, I still have Stanford in the top 3. I cannot explain them getting swept at home like they did this last weekend. I think there's something wrong with Kendall Kipp, 6 kills in the match. She's the go-to that has to lead them. So, but I still have them in the top 4. The polls that are dealing with numbers, RPI, KRPI, those polls have Texas at 2nd or 3rd, and I find that interesting. Louisville's going to have to beat some people. They've got to beat Georgia Tech, and they've got to beat Pittsburgh again to have a chance. But if I'm a coach in this top 5, I want to be 4 or 5. I don't want to be 1, 2, or 3 or any place else. I want to be 4 or 5, and that looks to me to be a Texas Louisville kind of situation to me.
Yeah, I mean, for my poll that I submitted for the media, it looks a little bit like this. I do have Texas 3 and Louisville 4, but clearly the Cardinals here this weekend can change that. It's a big weekend coming up, and I want to jump right into the committee's revealing of the top 10, which came out hilariously just minutes before Stanford finished up their loss against Arizona State, and in a top 10 that had Stanford number 2 over Wisconsin. But I do want to tease everybody of what we've got here this week. Purdue, Wisconsin on Wednesday, and then a action-packed Friday with Nebraska, Penn State, Washington State, Stanford, Louisville, Georgia Tech, Tennessee, Florida. Those are 4 incredibly important matches for the whole scheme of this top 5. And then Sunday, Purdue, Penn State, a nice rematch of that tight one that the Boilermakers won last month. And then Kentucky and Florida. That's the weekend to come. I did want to kind of jump on that here. But Mick, I do want to say, whether it be from a fan's perspective, I want to take my prognostication out of things. I don't think Stanford should be a top 4 seed if the fans continue to just be poor. You know, like you've got 4 teams up there with the chance to host to the regionals with great fan bases, right? Texas, Louisville, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. And then you have Stanford and their fans who show up and just make no noise and just don't stand up and don't fill Maples Pavilion. So in a way, if they wind up outside the top 4, I won't be upset from a viewing perspective when you come to the regionals.
Well, I guess we need a viewers poll then. We would have to have a viewers poll, who's drawing the highest attendance and that sort of thing. I think Stanford's going to be in the top 4. I'm sorry to say that, but that's the way that's going to be. But you sure could get a lot of people to say, from a standpoint of watching the regionals, it would be fun to have 10-12,000 people or more in each of the 4 sites. That's probably not going to happen, but I really think that this weekend the matches are critical, like you said, and there's going to be, right up until the 18th of November, and maybe the week after Thanksgiving, or the week just after Thanksgiving, that weekend, there are going to be some absolutely phenomenal matches. They're going to change things. The committee pointing out, they put out their top 10, totally useless after the unbelievable happenings Sunday. Not their fault at all. They had no idea that this could possibly happen. You might throw that top 10 out because it's already been reworked several different ways. And what a finish to the season, though. We've never had this kind of up and down, who's going to win, who's going to be in what position. So I think this is phenomenal for the sport. But boy, if you're a ranker or a pollster, you're out of luck.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the committee rankings with results through October 28th. And with Stanford 2, I'm going to go out on a limb here. This weekend, Friday night, Washington State, Stanford, that is a must win for Stanford to be a top 4 seed, in my opinion. If you lose to Washington State, on the heels of losing to Arizona State, you've already lost to Nebraska. Stanford has shown that they are human in conference play as well. You see Oregon is at 6. They looked pretty strong sweeping Washington and beating Washington State in 4. The Cougars led 22-20 in the 4th set, looking to force a 5th, called in the net. There was a challenge. It was replayed. Then an attack from the Cougars went out. That was challenged. That was overturned. I've never seen 2 challenges on the same play successful, but it worked out for WSU. And then Oregon finished the set on a 5-0 run to win the match 25-20. So they are probably creeping closer in my books to being in that conversation for the top 4 than, the loser of Stanford versus Washington State. Meanwhile, Texas put at 7 is certainly interesting, kind of shows the committee doesn't really respect the Big 12 in my eyes. And then a lot of respect to the SEC, right? Because you've got Pitt 8, Arkansas 9, Tennessee 10. And the SEC has kind of showed out here over the last 2 weeks, continuing to look strong. Arkansas swept Florida on Sunday, their first ever win in Gainesville. Tennessee continues to win as well. Kentucky has won 8 straight. Auburn reverse sweeps Georgia. They'll stay ranked as well. What are you seeing about the SEC as Tennessee beat Missouri and Texas A&M?
Well, they might beat each other up. That's the worry I would have if I were SEC. Kentucky, are they going to slip in there and finish first in that conference again after the horrendous start that they had? That's a story in itself. Tennessee has tremendous athleticism. Are they going to finally get their ball control straightened out and come in, or is Arkansas, with the undersized outsides, just going to mow through that whole group and move forward there? And then is Florida going to put up a fight? That's the other thing. You're looking at that. If they go down as far as 4th, that'll be the first time in history, I think, that they've been that low in the last 20 or 30 years. So that conference is really going to be fun to watch at the end here.
If they keep falling, it's one of those conversations where it's like, how much can you value wins before a major injury? I think they deserve to make the tournament because of the wins pre-conference and the wins with, the star setter and Stuckey, but, it just hasn't quite been the same. I do want to get to a couple of the big storylines here this week. Of course, Texas with the big comeback against Baylor on Thursday. They have now won 74 straight Big 12 home conference matchups. Friday, I think it was 24-20 in the first set, the match that we went to. And Texas just dominated Baylor. You know, Baylor just doesn't quite look like the team that Coach McGuire has had in the past. Now, they did come up with a couple big wins against UCF 2 weeks ago, but the Bears, not necessarily a team that is even close to deserving of a top 20 spot.
Yeah, I would say they're young, because Thursday night, before you arrived in Austin, the first two sets were amazing. The first two sets, Baylor versus Texas, Baylor went up 2-0, and Baylor played their finest volleyball of the year. All the young kids performed at a really high level, and this is without their good young left side, who's out injured right now. Baylor may be a team of the future. If they could sustain, they just lost their legs in the third set against Texas, and Texas had all they wanted from them. They were really able to come back and win 3 in a row, which was impressive to me to see Texas not falter under that situation. But they actually ran them out of the gym there by Thursday night, and then Friday Baylor couldn't reform an attack like they did on Thursday night. So I do think Baylor's worthy of the tournament at a pretty decent level, but they're playing to get better for next year, I think, at this point.
Well, if you're a coach having to vote, I do not envy you. Let's take a look at the top 25 now for the AVCA Taraflex D1 poll. Baylor does stay in the rankings. They're down at 21. They moved down 1 spot. Marquette joins in as Santa Barbara. You know, anyone that jumps in for the first time, watch out. Marquette jumping back in, seemingly a dangerous area, because Santa Barbara loses their first conference matchup against Irvine. They fall out. You know, there's just not many points for teams outside the top 25. In fact, Marquette is 60 points behind Auburn at 83 total points adjusted. The 26th ranked team is Minnesota at 35 points. So there is nobody that the coaches are really considering outside of this 25. Meanwhile, Georgia Tech limps towards a win over the weekend. They escaped Boston College in 5 sets. They sit at 10. Pittsburgh at 6 swept Virginia Tech and Wake Forest. I mentioned that Louisville swept a good Florida State team and a solid Miami team. So a great weekend for the Cardinals up ahead of their debut matchup with Georgia Tech for the first time this season. Let's go over a couple other storylines. Carter Booth did not start for Wisconsin against Michigan State. She did come in later in the set as the Badgers swept the Spartans. The Spartans, though, got to give them their due. It was a weekend filled with upsets in the Big Ten and the Pac-12. Purdue swept Minnesota and then fell to Illinois. Penn State beat Michigan and then lost to Michigan State. It was the first home win against a top 25 team for the Spartans since 2017. It was the first win against Penn State in East Lansing since 2002. And overall, Michigan State had not beaten Penn State since 2013. So that is a fall from grace for both Penn State and Purdue. Their chances of hosting have certainly taken a big hit as Penn State sits 16, Purdue 19.
And Penn State has 2 matches this week. They could come out 0-2 again this week. If they do, they will be in free fall. And what does that do to the Big Ten? I mean, that gets you to the Big Two is about what that gets you to. And that's the first time in a long time we've seen that.
Well, on the flip side, though, both Purdue and Penn State could play their way back into the top 16 because Purdue has Wisconsin, Penn State has Nebraska, and then they play each other on Sunday. So you could look at it from both sides. The two of them could certainly get right back into relevance. But hey, I just like to look at both sides of certain things, Mick. All right. We've waited long enough. Arizona State, 15th in the nation. What a jump for the Sun Devils. They move up from 21 to 15. The 21-3 record for Penn State is top 7 in this top 15 poll. So realistically, in terms of record, they're one of the 10 best teams. It's their first sweep against Stanford since 1993.
Arizona State, yes.
What did I say?
But are they for real? Are they for real?
You know what? They just kind of, they seemingly sleepwalk against the bottom of the conference. But Oregon State beat Washington State, showing that maybe the Beavers have a little bit of muster. I think that was one of the Arizona State losses.
Yeah, I just I don't understand Oregon State. You have to give the assistant from Pitt who took the Oregon State job really credit for sticking with the kids and getting them to play this well late in the season like this. They have not been a quality team up until this point. Well, they just took it on their back and roared through the conference this weekend. But Arizona State is so interesting to me. They had three players over 17 points per set in that big win against Stanford, and now you got to say, are they really for real? Because they seem to go up and down and up and down, and I've heard people say they really like the setter over there. So um, we should probably keep an eye on Arizona State.
We should watch them a little bit. They were swept by Colorado. They lost in 5 at Oregon State. Lindsey Bohonic was the former Pittsburgh assistant coach. Brought over a buddy of mine and Peter Mangiet and Becca Holgritz, both assistants that were at Cal Poly, are now assistants at Oregon State. Meanwhile, for Arizona State, they have to go do that LA swing this weekend at UCLA, at USC, and then only 2 more ranked matchups for them. They host Oregon November 17th and travel to Pullman the day before Thanksgiving, November 22nd. So still a few more tests. But Arizona State, I put them in my top 16. They deserve to host if they could finish strong with just 1, maybe 2 more losses. Let's say they lose both of those ranked matches and then win everything else. Certainly a conversation because of this, Mick. Nobody in the 15 through 20 really wanted to do much this week. It all started with Kansas State on Thursday, sweeping BYU, and then doing it again on Friday. So BYU from 8 to 12. I mentioned it was a bad weekend for Cougars, right? Washington State loses twice, BYU loses twice.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what's happened. I mean, if you're BYU and you lose 6-0, 6-0, think about that. In Manhattan, Kansas, you're down in that bowl there, and holy cow. But I'm just thinking what you said about Arizona State. Think about this. Oregon and Washington State, your last 2 games on the road in the year.
No,
unbelievable.
Back to back and not on the road. They're
not on the road.
Oregon, and that's on the 17th of November. They've got a couple matches between, and then on November 22nd, they go to Washington State and finish.
Okay, well, that would not be the way I'd want to finish the season. I'll tell you that. That would be just like playing in the tournament before it starts.
Right. So I wanted to clear that up. Meanwhile, teams like Kansas continue to stay hot. They swept West Virginia twice. Arkansas came from behind to beat South Carolina. Arkansas, with their highest ranking in program history at 8, they jump over Washington State. There's a lot to still be figured out here in this area. Creighton and Dayton keep on flowing and winning as Creighton swept Villanova. Dayton swept George Washington. But with Marquette in the top 20, that Creighton-Marquette match is looming.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's where Creighton has a chance to redeem themselves, or Marquette has a chance to take control of that conference. That's going to be an interesting matchup.
And that'll be this Sunday at 1:00 Central Time in Omaha. So that'll broadcast will be on Flow Sports. Certainly have to add that to my Sunday viewing. I'll be on a plane. I'm excited for it. And then once again, you have to imagine in Milwaukee, the 2 of them will probably match up again the weekend of Thanksgiving in the Big East Championship per usual there. Let's see. Houston stays in the top 25. They took care of Cincinnati handedly, while USC with a bad loss to Colorado. That's a tough one for the Trojans to swallow. But Colorado has now come away and beaten Arizona State and USC. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, you don't know what's happening in the Pac-12. I mean, they've been overlooked because everybody thinks they're not going to be the Pac-12 anymore. But you look, that conference has really produced some of the best matches of the year and the biggest upsets so far. And they're going to get quite a few teams in the tournament. People are going to say, how does that happen? Well, if you look at the body of work, they're right out there working and keep getting better. UCLA is trying to sneak in there right now. They've got their team up and playing much better than the first part of the year when the coach was with the national team. So the same as Michigan coming back and winning this weekend with their coach now there, not with the national team. So we're seeing a lot of different things. Boy, if I'm a spectator, I'm going to watch every weekend now for the next 5 weeks because I want to see what's going to happen because fireworks are flying.
And then lastly, we've got our Volleyball Magazine Super 16 poll that you and I vote on. Let's look at it. Penn State and Florida drop out of the top 16. It's Nebraska, Wisconsin, and then Louisville, Stanford, Texas. So Stanford does stay above Texas in this media poll. Arizona State jumps in for the first time. Dayton stays in the 16 spot with BYU going from 9 to 15. And Mick, I want to hear your 16 here. Walk me through what differences you have. For me, I actually put in Creighton. Creighton's a team that I bumped in the 16 spot, mainly in a play your way in with with no assist situation. Man, I've mixed those two up too many times. And I also dropped Georgia Tech all the way down to 14. That 5-setter against Boston College is worrisome. And if they can't show up, it's a must compete scenario for Georgia Tech on Friday for me to stay in top 16. If they get swept by Louisville, I'm not sure I'm too high on the Jackets moving forward.
Yeah, I think you have to watch them. I still have them at 10 just because the matches are coming up for them to prove where they need to be. I think you have to keep Texas ahead of Oregon and Washington State. I'm sorry. I had that Tech, Oregon, and Stanford because Texas has been beaten by Stanford and Oregon. So you've got to let those two be in front. I got Georgia Tech at 10, but I moved Kentucky up to 12. I think they're moving up. I had Kansas at 13, Dayton at 14, Creighton at 15. Now I actually had a tie between BYU and ASU for 16, and I had them going two ways. I had BYU going down and ASU coming up. So I let them head off at 16, and I kept them there with a tie. I need one more week to get this settled. I had Nebraska first, Wisconsin second, Louisville third, Stanford fourth. So now I'll have to see and watch. I moved Washington State down to 9th. I think you said you had them down there also. They're going to have to prove themselves again. Losing at home is just not good for Washington State. They have an advantage there. They need to win when they're at home.
Yeah, that was a late Sunday night comeback for Oregon State. You mentioned Nebraska and Wisconsin. Listen, Terry, we hear you in the comments. You want viewership numbers. Unfortunately, they just don't get posted that often. It's not easy. It's not like football where we can constantly check how many people watched each one. But the numbers did come in for the Wisconsin-Nebraska match. It's the most watched regular season volleyball match across any network ever with 612,000 viewers, the number one audience in BTN history. BTN averaging over 140,000 viewers per match. That's up over 10% from last year. So that's big news. Meanwhile, in the Big Ten, I wanted to give some love. We had 2 triple doubles this weekend from Indiana's Cameron Hayworth. Unfortunately, they both came in losses.
Yeah.
Crippling losses to Illinois and Northwestern.
Kind of like Russell Westbrook scoring 50 points, right?
That's a good one. Yeah, the Big Ten had this stat from Emily Eamon. It's good news and it's bad news. You mentioned how top heavy they've been. 6 different unranked Big Ten teams have beaten a top 25 opponent this year. Usually that's a Big Ten versus Big Ten beating. Not many unranked have beaten other ranked teams, so it's been some family feuds over there in the Big Ten conference. And as you mentioned, a lot is riding. In a way, Big Ten fans, they kind of need Penn State and Purdue to pull off some upsets this week against Wisconsin and Nebraska to keep those two relevant, to keep the conference afloat, because after the 4 of them, it's hard to find a 5th team. Is Minnesota or Ohio State really worth a bid in the 64 team tournament? It's going to be tough.
I don't think Ohio State will be 500, so I think they're out. I think they're really going to struggle to get to 500. It's going to be very close. Minnesota will get in my opinion, but limping, and I'm not sure. Yeah. So,
but they're also 500, Mick. So Minnesota's 10-10. That's, I
know.
Indiana's got an outside shot at 56th in the RPI. But who does Minnesota have for the rest of the year in terms of RPI teams? They still have Nebraska and Purdue, and then everyone else is outside of the top 50. So it's going to be tough if Minnesota can't beat either of those 2 teams for their RPI to climb. But for Indiana, they've got Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Ohio State, Michigan State as their top 90 teams left. So there's still a lot to be decided. Those losses from Indiana against Northwestern and Illinois just crushed them out of the top 50.
Yeah, and think if you're in the Big Ten right now for recruiting, that's going to be wild and woolly this coming spring for recruiting, because everybody can say we're going to be in the top 4 next year. We've got the best class coming in. I mean, everybody has got a chance to recruit because there's only going to be 2 teams up there at the top that everybody's going to be looking at. So I think it's going to be electric out there at the club tournaments, and you almost want to go and just watch and see what's happening, because I love it when those coaches sit in the stands and the parents all gravitate towards them to try to put in their 2 cents worth and that sort of thing. So it'll be big time West gunfighting for the Big Ten recruiters.
It will be. And I'll tell you one thing, this is one year that I am probably more locked into the NIVC field than ever before, because there could be some notable names if, Oldenburg decides that they're going to go in.
Yeah. What if Ohio State goes in there? Wouldn't other really good teams want to get in there also and do battle?
Diego has a potential to be I mean, Indiana could certainly help out, the future of that program if they give their young studs a little bit of experience in the postseason. The NIVC, as always, is hosted by the better seed, so you can give your arena a little bit of jolt. You can add to the budget and revenue as well. I mean, there's teams like Georgia, Mick, that are pretty darn good, and it can go out and beat a lot of teams. Whoever doesn't win the Big West Conference, whether it be Santa Barbara or Hawaii, Cal Poly, Long Beach, these are all teams that are, going to be on the outside looking in if they don't win their conference or conference tournament. I'd really enjoy seeing, a field that has more Power 5 teams this is the last year ever of the Power 5. So why not throw a bone and try to see if you guys can go out and win the NIVC? That I'm excited for. But Mick, anything else you wanted to discuss here? If not,
yes, Oregon State would be a good team if they don't get into the tournament. They'd be a great team to play in this tournament. Boston College won it last year. You talked about Boston College taking Georgia Tech to 5. That's a nice buildup for them from last year to this year. Now, how about Oregon State? If they come on late like this, they have a tournament to play in, really get their young kids going too. So pretty interesting.
Great point. Colorado as well has shown some vigor. Honestly, UCLA, USC probably feels like they are too big for it, but those would be great opportunities for whoever doesn't make the NCAA field. Well, we're going to wrap this one up. Talk to you guys next week as we will have our first episode in November. The year is flying by. Don't forget, you can still get tickets to Tampa. Almost sold out through the first market, but plenty of tickets in the secondary market, StubHub and all of the other above, Vivid Seats and all of that. So go ahead and try to snag your tickets. And then what you can do is you can try to catch Mick and I walking around Tampa. We may do some live shows and some other fun things going on the week of December 13th to the 17th. Well, we wrap this one up, Mick. It was a lot of fun to catch the volleyball match with you. I'll be reunited with Mick here because I'm in Austin for another 5 days covering the Big 12 soccer championship. You got your Longhorns up against Texas Tech on Wednesday in the semifinals. It's going to be a lot of fun. The Big 12, I wish the Big 12 volleyball had a tournament because these are teams that all can contend, right? You got BYU and Texas and Baylor and Kansas and Houston and a lot of very talented teams in the conference. Well, we wrap this one up. He's Mick. I'm Daniel, and this is Six Rotations.